you should.
Oh dear.
I know a lot of people.
Because hanging on by a thread with the midterm.
Yeah, I know a lot of people try to avoid my phone calls. That's why we have our intrepid executive
Who is
producer,
so
Mark
good.
Amaldi.
Yes, so good. Mark, much.
Yeah. Anyway, let's start with Pennsylvania is very important to the midterm elections. You've got a heated U.S. Senate race. You've got a heated gubernatorial race with an election denier running. You also have at least one very close House race. So there's a lot going on. First, give us an update on the U.S. Senate race. What's going on there?
Fetterman had a big lead, and then he's recently been pounded by these really kind of misleading Republican ads about crime, which have been brought on. Fox News suggested that Republicans do that, and they have done that around the country, and it's been successful for them, even though it's not based in reality. So that Fetterman's lead has been tightened, but he still looks to be leading on average of about 2 points. And that also...
By the way, let me interject here. CNN released a new poll today that Fetterman leading is 51-46.
Well, see, that's what I was just going to say, is that a lot of this polling in particular that I'm referring to was skewed by a Republican-leaning poll, and you as a pollster know, you're the expert on this, but you know what that does to the poll. So, 489,000 voters have already voted, and over 73% of those ballots were Democratic. So Fetterman has already banked a pretty sizable number of votes before we even get to Election Day. And I'm really glad you played that clip of him so that other people can hear. Pennsylvanians know him. They've known him since he was the mayor of Braddock, where he got his hands dirty trying to make lives better for regular Pennsylvanians. So that's basically what he stands for. And his case is very authentic in that sense. So he is having an easy time of making that case. And actually, I think he had appealed to a lot of Republican voters, and now the Republican voters are coming back home. They didn't like Oz, they don't trust him, they think he's a Democrat, but they are coming home to him due to all of these Republican ads that I'm sure you've seen them too, about crime. Not based in reality. But good news over here with the governor's race. Shapiro is up by 9 points, which is a really good thing. He is the attorney general right now. He is a law and order candidate. He's also running on protecting abortion to get the suburban votes. He is a very strong candidate, and he's got ads running here about Republicans voting for him. I really don't see Fetterman ads, and if I could say anything to the Fetterman campaign, that would be it. But I've seen Shapiro ads since the start of this election. Mastriano has really no money left, and he's pretty much only holding events for far-right election-denying Trump supporters, and he doesn't allow the press to come in. Basically, he's campaigning from Facebook and with his, far-right Gab-type neo-Nazi white supremacist supporters. So hopefully, that race looks good right now, and it will conclude that way. So the Pennsylvania looks good right now. Just, like everyone else, I can't predict who's going to turn out to vote, and that's what it's all going to come down to.
Well, I've gone out of prediction business myself, so a lot can happen in 2 weeks, so you just never know. And that's when a lot of voters focus, we talk about politics all the time, but most Americans have better things to do and talk about, and a lot of voters just focus in the last 2 weeks of the campaign where we are now. So let's now. I believe there's a debate between Fetterman and Oz tomorrow. Is that true?
Right. Yep.
Now, there's been a lot of controversy in the last week or so. Fetterman did an interview, I think it was with MSNBC, where he was using basically a reader to answer the questions, and that raised questions about Fetterman's recovery from the stroke he suffered back in the spring or whenever it was. What do you look forward to in the debate tomorrow night?
Well, I don't think that I think that the national media has kind of blown that up a little bit out of proportion. That interview in particular, Jason Eastley, my partner on Politicus USA, wrote a really important article about that. He has a disability, and he was talking about how, using assistive technology isn't something to criticize. It doesn't mean he can't do his job. He is recovering from a stroke. This is part of the recovery process, but he's supposed to recover completely. Is that going to impact him in the debate? It probably could, but I don't know that that's going to be the win with the Pennsylvanian voters. A lot of Pennsylvanians, like people in hard-hit states, have health issues, and they kind of relate to Fetterman over this, rather than thinking, oh yeah, he can't do his job because he had a stroke. I mean, I hate to say it, I moved here from another state, so I'm not bashing Pennsylvania. I love it here, but this is not a state known for its healthy eating. So I'll just leave it there. We're not a crudité state, far be it from Oz to know that, because
okay.
So I don't know. I think it might take people aback if he struggles. We'll see how that goes. But so far he hasn't been struggling in answering questions. So, and he's going to have a chance to probably rehearse these. So.
Okay. And I should point out in the governor's race that the Republican candidate is a prominent denier of Joe Biden's election. I believe he was in Washington on the day of the abortive Capitol coup, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And not only did he bus people to that coup, he claims he didn't cross the barriers, but there is video, I believe, of him doing that, the police barriers. He's also, and I believe I've mentioned this before, but it shouldn't be ignored. He paid the Gab website where anti-Semites and neo-Nazis gather. And this is the same website where the shooter from the Tree of Life Synagogue, the largest, most horrific shooting of Jewish people in our country, mass shooting.
We're going to go to break now, Sarah, but we come back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and our guest, Sarah Jones, Editor-in-Chief, Politicus USA.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you...
Okay, welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Sarah Jones, Editor-in-Chief of Politicus USA. You can check out their website at PoliticusUSA.com. That's POLITICUS, USA, all one word, .com. Okay, Sarah, let's try this. Yesterday, the Washington Post reporter and author Bob Woodward released a series of audio tapes that he did, which has Trump in full Trump, actually. And one of the things Donald Trump says in that is he believes the election in Pennsylvania this year will be a test run for his presidential campaign in 2024. The assumption being that if Republicans prevail and Oz is in fact a hand-picked Trump candidate, wins, that means Trump wins in Pennsylvania in 2024. What do you think of that argument?
Well, Trump is Trump. I think he's smoking Trump. The man is not known to be in touch with reality, and I would say that's true here. Pennsylvanians, even Trump supporters here, and I talk to people on a daily basis who are strong Trump supporters, who wanted to be his delegate. That's, people are that close to his camp, and they've told me, not every single one of them, but a majority of them, they don't want him to run again. They're tired of the drama. So I don't think he stands a chance here. And he can't win with just his base anyway. He needs, as long as we're still counting the votes, which may be up for grabs depending on how this midterm goes. But if we're still counting the votes, he doesn't stand a Trump's chance in hell here.
Okay, well, that's comforting. I certainly hope you're right about that, because I know I couldn't stand another 4 years of Trump. That reminds me of another question I wanted to ask you. Going back to the governor's race, haven't a lot of Republicans endorsed the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Attorney General Joel Shapiro?
His ads even talk about that, but he has Republicans on his ads, and I've seen them interviewed in local papers here, law enforcement Republicans, police officers, and everyone up and down in law enforcement, saying that he's the only candidate they trust, because they know that he, as Attorney General, has done his job, and he's done it impartially, and he's done it well, and so they trust him. You look at Doug Mastriano, he attacks other Christians. He literally will tell, not just, so he's, it's not okay for him to attack anyone, but he's narrowed down the base of people he finds acceptable to only a certain kind of Christian as well. So,
I remember the old days in politics where you tried to increase the number of people you're trying to attract. But that's me being old-fashioned.
Those were the good old days.
Yeah, those were the good old days. We're going to go to break now, but we come back, we'll have more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon, and more importantly, more of Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of PoliticusUSA. We'll be back right after these messages so we can bring back our radio listeners, who we love. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour, as part of Midterm Madness here at Deadline DC, is Sarah Jones, who's the editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Her Twitter handle, by the way, is Politicus Sarah, Politicus USA. Let me try that again. Politicus Sarah, all one word, and Sarah is S-A-R-A-H. Okay, let's try this. My reading of the national polls, at least, is that Republicans have gained some momentum in the last couple of weeks. The New York Times released a national poll yesterday or the day before, showing there's a lot more concern in the last month. Well, I'll put it this way. Concern about crime and inflation has gone up. Concern about abortion rights has gone down, and that has fueled a Republican surge. What do you think about that, Sarah?
Well, I think we should always pay attention to polls and fight if it gives you an opportunity.
I'm glad you said that, because I'm a pollster. So
yeah, right.
Yes.
So, and it matters because you're talking to voters, and so if this is what voters are saying, then that needs to be addressed. And I did hear President Biden did address and make this closing argument today about what Democrats stand for, which needs to be done. Democrats need to close that argument on inflation. Republicans have not a leg to stand on inflation. I don't know why the media is not putting that in context for voters, but Democrats have done everything they can to protect voters from being price gouged, and that is 50% of the cause of inflation that's going on right now is greed, corporate greed. So what do I think about that poll? Well, that's another issue. As an expert, it all matters about who they're asking, likely voters. It matters who they're asking. And it also, we look at who is likely to vote in midterms normally, and it's older people. I'm not sure a lot of older people, if they're doing like the people who usually vote in midterms, care about abortion. It doesn't impact you as much when it's not an issue that you're facing as often. I'll just put it that way. I guess there's some people, giving birth later in life, but most people aren't. So I also think that there's this there's a distancing. Well, Republicans have hammered down the crime narrative, which, they've been, and the media's ran with that, and we've seen Fox News introduce that, and we've seen in studies that the mainstream media picks that stuff up and they make it into a thing, and that has happened. And I think it's really unfortunate, because really what's at stake here is democracy, and then we look at individual liberty, and abortion is part of that. I also think that women have already, who care about their individual freedom, they already know how they're going to vote. They may not be even talking about it anymore. I mean, the anger about that has kind of solidified into, we are going to do everything. It's like when you live with a woman who's not happy with you anymore and she kind of stops talking to you, that doesn't mean everything's okay. And that's what I would say about that poll. It's in there. Women haven't forgotten. Are they going to, go ahead. Sorry.
Let me ask you about this. I was watching Bernie Sanders on CNN yesterday, and he made the argument that Democrats have been too distracted and haven't talked enough about the economy, which is the number one concern of voters. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I think it's an easy thing to say, and maybe it's true, but I think the other part of that is, because I've got a list in my head. Bernie Sanders himself, an independent, but he's talked about it a lot. Katie Porter talks about it. President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, those, without Katie Porter, but Pelosi and Biden are the leaders of the Democratic Party. They have talked about it a lot. Is the message getting through? I don't hear the media putting this in context for voters. They do that, he said, she said, ask both sides, and then they just leave it there. Or then they use, people are worried about this, so that's going to be on the fault of the people in charge. Well, that is a natural assumption. People go there because if you're in charge, they figure you could have done something about it. Why don't they know that Republicans voted against stopping the price gouging?
That's actually a very good question, Sarah, because I remember looking at a poll. I think it was conducted for the news agency Reuters a couple of weeks ago, and they asked voters about the Inflation Reduction Act. The bad news was hardly any, well, I'm not, that's probably a statement. Few voters knew what was in the Inflation Reduction Act. They didn't know about the clean energy provisions. They didn't know about the Medicare provisions, which cap out-of-pocket expenses, and also gives the government the power to negotiate using its market clout with pharmaceutical companies. The good news was, when they told voters about that stuff, they really liked it. Problem is, at least 2 weeks ago, very few voters knew anything about it. Why is that?
Right. That's what I don't think it's just that Democrats aren't talking about it. Like, here's just this clip of Katie Porter's went a little bit viral, but just to reiterate and recap it for people, because in case they were talking to other voters, let people know. So she had this claim, and it got fact-checked, and it's true. On average, 11.4% of inflationary price increases became corporate profits between 1979 and 2019.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Since the 2020 pandemic, that number jumped to 53.9%. So over 50% of this inflation, these price increases, is due to corporate greed.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question then. We knew inflation was going to be a big issue back early in the year. So why have Democrats failed to make that case? Because if you look at the polls and you ask the people, inflation is the number one issue, and the people who are concerned about the issue are, probably, Republicans have a 15-point advantage over, among people who are very concerned about inflation. What happened? Why didn't we make the case?
I think that's a good question. I think Democrats could always do a better job with messaging. That is not their forte. Governing is their forte. This is a sad situation there. They're kind of like the person that's not good at marketing themselves. I would say that about myself. I like to do the work, but I don't like to talk about doing the work. So I think they're really crappy at talking up their accomplishments, and their accomplishments are so in the weeds that it's hard for them to talk about. They get so into like all the details of the policy and wanting to be accurate about everything, and you can't message like that. Look at Republicans. They have one message, they stick to it, they pound it home, even when it's a lie, they don't care, they just keep going. And I think that Democrats did not pick that one message. So I think they're on them, and it's something they always do get wrong, is they are very bad at messaging. On the other hand,
sad but true.
Yeah, it is sad. And what I think in terms of gas prices, for example, Biden thought he had done all he could to get gas prices down, and it was going to stay that way. And then you saw Saudi Arabia wanting
Lowered
to,
boom.
yeah, and they are, a lot of Saudi money has gone to Republicans in Congress. I've been
And the Trump family.
Yes, of course, yes. But they're funding candidates basically through this dark money kind of funnel. And so they know where to go. They know what to do to make the American people think, oh, got to vote for Republicans and then I'll get cheap gas. Well, Republicans don't care about you having cheap gas, Republicans care about making profits for themselves. And it's just, we're in a really bad situation in terms of having this context explained to the voters. So I feel so frustrated by that. I feel frustrated when I read these polls and think, how do people not know this? But then I talk to people every day that, like you mentioned earlier, that don't pay attention to politics. So I know, they're just hearing stuff on the outskirts. Maybe they watch The View the morning they vote, and that will impact their entire vote. So Democrats have got to find a way to make their messaging more simple.
Yes, they do. We only got about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to ask you in 30 seconds, what should the Democratic closing argument be for the last 2 weeks?
I think the Democratic closing argument should be that if you care about this country, if you are worried about our national security, and you want to know that you're safe and that your personal liberty will be protected, and that the people in charge care about your pocketbook issues, vote for Democrats. Okay,
well, that's great, because that's all the time we have left. I want to thank Sarah Jones, Editor-in-Chief of PoliticusUSA, for joining us, and also Nick Gunther from Our Blue Future. We'll be back next week with more Deadline DC and more midterm madness.